did you feel the loss of not having TJ Watt out there?
I didn't think about it, to be quite honest with you. We knew all week he wasn't playing, and so we prepared with that mindset. And so I didn't waste any time thinking about what wasn't at our disposal. We had too much at our disposal and too many decisions and considerations to be made to waste time like that.
How do you think Mason did after throwing that interception?
I thought he was solid. I thought he was competitive. I thought his confidence was unshakable. I thought he, displayed the things that he displayed really for the last month or so.
Anyone?
Mike, you have a year left on your contract.
Man, goodbye, baseball. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to First Kick Seahawks. I'm Camden McLaren. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It would really help out the channel. We are still going to keep going, even though right now we don't have a head coach. What exciting topics to bring up that we don't have a head coach. Let me first go into this by saying I'm not meaning any disrespect on anyone's toes when I go through this conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. Sure, I might be calling him Grandpa, but he kind of feels like Grandpa to all of us. People have been talking about how it feels different than when Mike Holmgren left, or when other teams seem to leave, have their coaches leave long term. It feels different than I guess most recently compared to when Sue Bird retired. How the city was just overwhelmingly in support. And when Pete Carroll retires, again, there's going to be some street named after him or some statue or what have you. But moving forward, who's our head coach going to be? Well, we know John Snyder's taking over for general manager duties completely, because that used to be shared thing with Pete. The other thing is, he's kind of taking over some of the CEO duties. So is the next coach that's going to come in going to get the same type of CEO type role that Pete Carroll did? Or is that just John Snyder now? And is Jody Allen going to be more involved? That's one thing that has been mentioned is I have said that because of her contract, she has to sell the Seahawks at some point. And then it would make sense for her to want to sell after the May blah, blah, blah date this year. Because then she could make as much money as possible back. It's some contract that was put in the clause of her brother's will when Paul was alive in 1996. And the Blazers and the Seahawks were both eventually wrapped up into that. The proceeds of the sale of the team would go to charity. And that's an interesting thing. I was listening to Brendan and Brandon of the Hawks Nest, and they brought up something interesting, which is that Jody Allen could just possibly decide to buy the Seahawks herself outright. The contract says she has to sell the team and that a certain amount of money needs to go to charity. So technically she could buy the team from her brother, who's deceased, but it's owned by Vulcan. So I think, and she could get other buyers in on it and get instead of just herself, maybe Jeff Bezos is half in on it, or maybe Ballmer's in on it or something, right? And then they just buy the Seahawks for whatever $1 billion it is. And then in the end, she ends up being really involved. Because a big question right now is, well, Pete Carroll was super involved. And he said that he was fired by... He didn't say he was fired by... This is me concluding. He basically said he was fired by people who don't understand football. And I mean, I get that. Because all the time, people hire workers underneath them to do jobs that they can't comprehend. You are skilled at this thing. Right? I'm not skilled at this thing. You're skilled at this thing. I want you to do the job. And so then how do you then decide to move on from one of the most elite of that position that you're hiring for them to do? Well, you either have something planned or you're really involved and you have a direction you want it to go that's different than the guy that was already in place. So either people are speculating, oh, she won't sell the team now because, Pete Carroll's there. So it'll still be like 8 years or maybe 20 years down the road. I mean, sure. Right. Technically, I suppose if she wants to hang on to the team for another 10, 20 years, she could do that. But is she just going to be like, well, I own this team? Or is she going to be like Jerry Jones and be like constantly critiquing every coach and breathing down their necks? Or is she going to be like some just, I don't know, I'm on an island and I forgot I own this team. How are they doing this year? Let's check them out. I don't know. There's not really a lot of football guys when it comes to ownership. Like people have said, what? Maybe Jerry Jones? Maybe Irsay? I don't know. There's not really. Al Davis used to be a straight up football guy. So maybe Mark Davis is. But there aren't really any owners in the NFL that you would call like football guys. They're businessmen. Like they might be football fans. Like the Jaguars are owned by Shad Khan. It was like a businessman who thought it would be a good investment because he owns like other leagues. Even Kroenke, he makes his money like owning leagues, owning teams in leagues. That's kind of how he's been able to make some profit lately. I don't know if that's the only way he makes his money. I'm just saying he's one of the richest guys in the NFL, but he's heavily involved because he wants his team to do well. He wants his team to be in an area where the market is going to be huge, and he's directly involved with the NFL office and Goodell in arranging that thing. So he has a different goal than like a Pete Carroll saying, I just want to win games and always compete. Some teams are like, well, we want to put butts in seats. Well, we want to market this way. Well, we want to cut like some deals this way so we can save ourselves money because we're the Cardinals. And since we're not filling our stadium, we can only do so much. So I don't know what type of owner Jody Allen has been, other than patient, which is remarkable. You see a lot of owners out there, and they kind of like, look at the Browns, coach after coach, quarterback after quarterback. You look at the Cowboys, they had like Jason Garrett for the longest time, and now it's Mike McCarthy. And with the Packers, it was Mike McCarthy, and then it was now Matt LaFleur. And then the Ravens have had John Harbaugh forever. And the Rams, to their credit, had like, Jeff Fisher and then a lot of McVay still going on. But what's a dysfunctional organization look like? What's an organization that goes from Jim Harbaugh to Chip Kelly to Tom Sula and then to Kyle Shanahan? Right, the big shuffle of coaches. And even then, that's not dysfunctional because they came out of it on the other end with Kyle Shanahan. Look at the Falcons. Yeah, they get Dan Quinn, who then brings in Kyle Shanahan, and they go to a Super Bowl. And then everything just kind of falls apart for them again. Who's their guy right now? Arthur Smith? Why do I feel like he's been a coach for them twice? It's because they had this other dude beforehand who was also just not a good coach. There's quarterback purgatory, but there's a worse place to be than quarterback purgatory. And that's coach purgatory. If you end up with a coach who can't get players to want to show up, if you end up with an owner who can't get coaches to want to show up, then everything's going to fall apart. it's amazing that some, like the Commanders, it's amazing that they could get any coaches before it all. Of course, it had to be like based off of their previous legacy. What was that, Gibbs? And then the Shanahan tree, and then coming in and reestablishing the Shanahan tree. But they're just an embarrassing owner. And so now that the owner's replaced, a lot of, there's a lot more conversations that can be taken seriously about, if Mike Tomlin decides to leave the Steelers, he was a DC kid. He grew up in the Washington DC area, is what I recall, if I'm correct. So with this new Commanders ownership and with the new building possibly coming up and them literally starting from scratch in a pretty suboptimal division, we can talk about the Cowboys and the Eagles' abilities at some other time, but would you rather play against the Ravens and the Browns and the Bengals twice a year, or would you rather play against the Giants and the Eagles and the Cowboys twice a year? You'd probably do better in the NFC East. So if Mike Tomlin decides to set some deal with the Steelers where they, I believe it's the Rooneys, end up trading him to the Commanders or allowing him to be released so that he can go out and seek a new contract, that would be pretty interesting to see where a Mike Tomlin would go. And why do I bring him up? And how does that relate to the Seahawks? This is the Seahawks show, Camden. What does this do? Well, Pete Carroll's gone. And the question has been, who's better than Pete Carroll? What's a coach that's better than Pete Carroll? Who gets guys to show up and ready to go? Who every single season is that coach, no matter how good the division is? Well, in the past, we've talked about Bill Belichick. And if Bill Belichick comes to the Seahawks, it's for what, 2 years? And there's also conversation about him going to the Cowboys to take the place of Mike McCarthy. He has a defense ready to go and a quarterback and a bunch of weapons. It'd be easy for him to rack up wins. Would he have that incentive instead of going to Shanahan and McVay's division? There's conversations about Jim Harbaugh. Oh yeah, Jim Harbaugh. He was in a Super Bowl once and played for the Colts, and he just did his thing with Michigan. It could be like Pete Carroll 2.0, where he just needed to go back to college and coach in college, and then he comes out having reimagined himself. Or, as my microphone arm continues to struggle, what if the Seahawks get Mike Tomlin? That'd be fucking rad. This Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season. He's had 17 winning seasons in a row. If you want to have the conversation about who's better to have as a Seahawks head coach right now than Pete Carroll, it's Mike Tomlin. He even just beat us earlier this year with his third string quarterback. It was pretty convincing the way that they balled out. Got his team to the playoffs when they didn't stand a chance. You team him up with John Schneider, and I'm excited for what the team has to offer. If you team Bill Belichick up with John Schneider, I'm like, okay, so when's the rebuild starting in a couple years? Are we just going to teeter with Bill Belichick for a couple years until he gets his wins and maybe, yeah, he brings the discipline we need, but our team's not really going to grow? If we bring in a Mike Tomlin, that's one of the best fucking coaches in the league. Hands down. And if you want to talk about youth, Grandpa is gone. That's what I'm joking about, right? Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll are in their 70s, and we always talk about how great Sean McVay is, and he's a young guy. Mike Tomlin is 51. And he spent 17 of his years in the NFL as a head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, always having a winning season. And he's 51. Man, get him out of the cold-ass Pittsburgh. Move him over here by the lake and stuff. He's a disciplinarian. He's got that attitude. I bet he'd vibe really well with DK Metcalf. And again, he's still on the team as far as I know, unless he's been dropped within this. But if you're having a conversation about how do we make our team better, there's this other side, which is, well, let's not get a Matt Patricia. Well, let's not bring in what's his name? Canales from the Buccaneers. Maybe we should bring in Canales from the Buccaneers. He's been an offensive coordinator for 1 year. There's a lot of that going on, where they're picking around. Man, I don't want Jim Mora again. We throw Jim Mora under the bus because that's how few coaches we have. As a Seahawks organization, we're not like the Steelers, where the Steelers keep a coach for 17 fucking years and that's normal, right? We'll still go through coaches, but it's not like, well, that was 1 year. Oh, that was the next year. Oh, that was the next year, right? As a franchise, we've historically done pretty good at finding coaches that are going to stick around for a while and have long-lasting careers. And if anyone is going to replace Pete Carroll, I would so much want it to be Tomlin. I talked earlier about how it could be Vrabel. People were shooting me down saying no, because he's going to the Patriots. He's not going to the Patriots because they already signed Mayo as their head coach, because it was a contract under Bill Belichick. So don't call me crazy until everything's on ink. There's also this conversation of not Mike McDaniel. There's the defensive coordinator for the Ravens. People have talked about him coming to Seattle. Evero from the Denver Broncos, who then went to, I think he was at the Bears this year. I don't quite remember where he went. But he was the guy who had that super good defense for Russell Wilson last year for the Broncos. And then he ended up being the interim head coach for the last few games, and they won some games. He interviewed with Jody Allen and company to become the new head coach. So that's there might have been others, but that's the first that I'm aware of. So this idea then that, well, we should go for a defensive-minded coach, or we should go for an offensive-minded coach. It doesn't really matter to me. I don't care how good Dan Quinn's defense was with the Legion of Boom. Just like I don't care how good Evero's defense was with the Broncos. How are their leadership skills on the field? When you look at Antonio Pierce from the Raiders, when he became the interim head coach, the team A, begged for him, and B, he turned that team around. We don't know if he's going to be a good head coach going forward, but it shows really strong leadership abilities. Shane Waldron might be better at calling offense than Antonio Pierce is calling defense. But you know what Pierce is probably much better at? Getting these guys ready to show up on Sunday, and then finding game planners underneath him, to make his offense and by his offense make the team's offense run. Which comes to Sean Payton. One of the biggest criticisms I gave him when they got hired, and then what he ended up getting hired after all of this and Russell being gone, is he doesn't take a team and then change his offense to match the players. he makes the players have to do what he wants. And that's not a good coach. That's a great offensive mind. Do this, go over there, X goes here, O slides under, then the Z slip, and then look out for the Y, right? He does all these crazy things, but can he lead men? And so far, Sean Payton has not. You know what Mike Tomlin can do? He can lead men. You know why, Pete Carroll being let go has like half the Seahawks franchise crying right now, literal tears? It's because he can lead not just men, but the entire franchise. What if Mike Tomlin wants to change the scenery and he wants this opportunity to come into Seattle and we're going to give you the CEO thing that Pete Carroll had? And Jody Allen decides to keep the Seattle Seahawks for another 20 years or however she wants before she has to sell it. Or hell, just buys it outright. I think y'all might be thinking too small. We want the Huskies coach. Oh no, he went to Alabama or whatever. I don't know. Like, come on. Let's look at some true competitors in the league that we have right now. And it's Mike Tomlin. It's Mike Tomlin. I don't want Bill Belichick. It'd be funny, though. Like the Jerry Rice comparisons. Like, yep, everyone comes to the Seattle to retire. But if you want to, instead of having a short Band-Aid fix, the dude's 51. Let's fucking go get Mike Tomlin. He at the end of his presser after he loses to the Bills, who are a damn good team, he's asked about how he has 1 year left on his contract, and he walks out of the room. So much emotion. Reminded me of someone, Pete Carroll. A couple years ago, Pete Carroll's foaming at the mouth, and he walks out of a game presser, comes back in and apologizes to everyone. It's like, I need to be better. I need to represent everything that's going on with the Seattle organization. You guys spend time to do your job, so I'm going to respect that. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments below about who you want to be the coach. I don't want anyone that's been a former Seattle head coach. Sure, yes. But I don't want anyone that's been a former coach. I don't want Dan Quinn. Because he might be a good defensive mind, but I don't know if he's a good head coach. Because when he was a head coach, his team was, for the most part, dysfunctional. Except for that brief time he had Kyle Shanahan, whose team is never dysfunctional. The 49ers are always poised and ready to go. Gus Bradley, kind of the same thing. Chris Richard, don't know. He's never had the opportunity to be a head coach. So let's bring in an awesome opportunity right now. We got Tomlin on the table and Vrabel on the table. And we might even have Mike McCarthy on the table. And say what you want about Mike McCarthy, that dude's a fucking winner. And sure, he can't typically get it over the top. But he'll have John Schneider as his GM. So maybe the collection of these Green Bay guys getting back together will take something to the next level. I don't know. The future's really exciting. Depending on what Jody Allen wants to do. If she wants to, okay, we're going to sell the team in like 2025. I need to wait for this contract, confirmation to be done in May of 2024. And then we'll start, trying to sell the team afterwards. Then it could be, in my opinion, beneficial for her to get Bill Belichick. Be like, we'll have you for a couple years, and then you'll be part of the transition from one owner to the new owner. But if she decides to stick around, girl, go get Mike Tomlin. Find a way. He's done being a bumblebee. He's ready to be a hawk. Anyways, thank you so much for being here. Please like and subscribe to First Kick Seahawks. I haven't been commenting as much like this stream isn't as long because everything's up in the air right now. I don't know what conversation to have. I'm waiting diligently as we all are. So you all be well, okay?